The clinking of the fork against the crystal champagne flute was the sound that stopped my world. It was a sharp, cheerful sound that didn't belong in the sudden silence that had fallen over the ballroom. I stood there, in my white dress, my hand still in my new husband's, a smile frozen on my face. All I could see was my stepfather, Robert, standing at the microphone, a warm, paternal smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. In that suspended moment, with 150 of our friends and family looking on, a single, cold thought sliced through the haze of champagne and joy. He has been waiting for this exact moment. And he is not here to bless me. My mother married Robert when I was 13. In the beginning, he was just a quiet, well-dressed presence in our small apartment. He wasn't warm, not exactly, but he was stable. He paid the bills on time, fixed the leaky faucet, and drove me to school when it rained. My mother, a single parent who had worked 2 jobs for years, glowed with a relief I was too young to understand. "We're safe now, Maya," she'd whisper, smoothing my hair. To her, Robert represented security. To my teenage self, he was a polite stranger I had to share my mother with. The real shift happened after my college graduation. My biological father, who had drifted in and out of my life, passed away quietly. What we didn't expect was the modest life insurance policy he'd left in my name. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a seed for a future. Robert, by then a financial advisor, offered to help me manage it. "Let it grow for you, Maya," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder. "For your wedding, for a house. I'll make sure it's safe." Grateful, and seeing my mother's trusting nod, I agreed. The money disappeared into an account he managed. I'd get vague statements, talk of market movements and long-term growth. I was busy building my career in graphic design, navigating my first serious relationship with David. I trusted him. Or rather, I trusted my mother's trust in him. When David proposed, my joy was boundless. Robert seemed genuinely pleased. He even insisted on contributing a significant amount to the wedding fund. "Nothing but the best for my girl," he'd tell my mother, who would beam with pride. He took charge of the venue bookings, the caterer deposits, speaking with a firm authority that relieved my stressed-out mother and my then-fiancé, David, who was overwhelmed with a project at work. I felt taken care of. I saw it as his way of finally bridging the distance between us, of truly becoming family. I remember sitting with him one evening, going over floral arrangements. "You've become such a beautiful woman, Maya," he said, not looking up from the invoice. "A real success. Your father would be proud." I mistook his clinical tone for shyness. I mistook control for care. The fault line was never about anger or shouting. It was in the quiet transfer of agency, in my grateful surrender of details to the man who held the purse strings. The wedding day was a blow of silken laughter and happy tears. Everything was perfect. The ceremony was heartfelt. As we moved into the reception, the love in the room was a tangible thing. Then, during the speeches, Robert stood up. He adjusted his tie, tapped the mic, and began. He started sweetly, talking about watching me grow. Then his tone shifted, ever so slightly. It became instructive. "Maya has always been a dreamer," he said, a chuckle in his voice that the crowd echoed politely. "Sometimes, a little too much of a dreamer. I remember when she wanted to invest that little nest egg from her father in a friend's startup. A coffee truck, I believe." A ripple of laughter. My smile tightened. That wasn't true. "Luckily," he continued, "I was there to steer her toward sensible choices, to teach her about the real world." He went on, each anecdote subtly framed as him saving me from my own naivete, my poor judgment. He spoke of my career as a cute little hobby that he was glad finally worked out. He mentioned David's family, noting how fortunate David was to be marrying into a family with real financial sense now. With every sentence, my wedding felt less like my celebration and more like his showcase. A showcase of his control, his superior wisdom. He was erasing my father's memory, my own struggles and successes, and painting himself as the sole architect of my stability. The guests' laughter began to feel forced. I saw David's hand clench on the table. I saw my mother's confused smile, trying to keep up. Robert raised his glass, his eyes finally meeting mine across the room. They were calm, utterly assured. "So, let's toast," he boomed. To Maya, who finally learned to listen. The silence after the toast was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The rest of the reception passed in a muffled nightmare. People congratulated me with pity in their eyes. "What a unique speech," they'd say. David was furious, but I was too numb to talk, just squeezing his hand, whispering, "Later, please, not here." My mother fluttered around, defensive. "He's just proud, Maya. He's awkward with emotions." She couldn't, or wouldn't, see the humiliation. The pressure didn't ease after the wedding. It crystallized. It seeped into our new marriage. David and I would argue, not about the speech, but about money, about plans. A shadow had been cast. When we started looking for a house, I naturally went to Robert for the funds from my father's investment. He sighed over the phone. "The market's taken a dip, sweetheart. That money isn't liquid right now. It's the wrong time." He suggested we wait, or better yet, let him invest in a property he knew about, a better opportunity. Then came the invoice. A week after we returned from our honeymoon, a detailed, itemized bill for the wedding arrived at our tiny apartment. It was addressed to me. Line items for the venue, the catering, the flowers, all far higher than the quotes I'd initially seen. At the bottom, in bold, was a remaining balance. A balance that, coincidentally, nearly matched the last known value of my investment fund. A note was paper-clipped. "So proud we could give you this day. Let's settle this soon." A Robert. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a gift. It was a transaction. One I never agreed to. When I called him, my voice trembling, he was calm. "Maya, the initial estimates were just that. Estimates. Premium services cost more. I covered the deposits, but now the final bills are due. I assumed you'd use your fund. It's what it was for, after all." He made me feel childish for not understanding business, for expecting a free ride. I hung up, staring at the ugly numbers on the page. The social pressure mounted. My mother called weekly, urging me to make peace. "He feels you're being ungrateful, Maya. He did so much." Family gatherings became minefields. Robert would make pointed comments about living within one's means, and young people today expecting handouts. David's family started asking quiet, concerned questions. The unity of our wedding had shattered, leaving me isolated, questioning my own memory, my own right to be angry. I felt financially trapped and emotionally gaslit. The home David and I dreamed of receded into the distance, replaced by the crushing weight of this manufactured debt. The turning point came 4 months later, buried in a box of my mother's old tax documents she'd asked me to store. As I was rearranging our closet to fit David's winter clothes, a folder slipped out. It was from the year my father died. Absently, I flipped through it, and there it was, a copy of the life insurance policy declaration page. Not a vague statement, but the original, binding document. My eyes scanned the legal language. The beneficiary, Maya E. Wilson. The face value. And then, the crucial detail I'd never seen, a clause about payout options. It stated the beneficiary could choose a lump sum or a structured annuity. And in the margin, in my mother's handwriting from years ago, was a note, "Maya opts for lump sum, to be transferred to her dedicated guardian account. Robert to manage." A lump sum, not a complex, fluctuating investment portfolio. A specific amount of money. A number that was significantly larger than any statement Robert had ever shown me. I sat on the floor of my closet, the paper cold in my hands. The pieces, sharp and ugly, clicked into place. The vague statements, the refusal to liquidate, the wedding bill that matched the old, lower value he'd reported. It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't market volatility. He had never invested the lump sum. He'd been drip-filing me information, holding the bulk of my money, probably using it for his own ends, while making me feel indebted and foolish. The wedding wasn't a gift he generously paid for. He had, in effect, used a fraction of my own money to throw a party that served to publicly cement his image as my benefactor, and then presented me with a bill for the rest. It was a cruel, perfect plan. The humiliation of the toast wasn't a byproduct. It was the point. To make me feel small, to make everyone see me as the dependent child, so no one would question him when he finally called in the debt. The betrayal was no longer emotional. It was forensic. And it changed everything. I didn't scream. I didn't call my mother. I didn't confront Robert. For the first time since the wedding, a profound calm settled over me. The fog of doubt had lifted, replaced by a clear, cold map of the battlefield. He thought I was an emotional, naive dreamer. I needed to become a quiet, meticulous archivist. I started in secret. I reached out to an old university friend, Sarah, who was now a forensic accountant. Over hushed coffees, I showed her the documents, explaining only the financial facts, not the family drama. Her professionalism was a balm. "This is a serious matter, Maya," she said, her eyes hard. "We need to trace the money." Next, I visited a lawyer, a stern, kind-eyed woman named Patricia. I laid out the story, the documents, the wedding invoice. "This is financial control and potential misappropriation," she said calmly. "Your stepfather had a fiduciary duty. We can send a demand letter for a full accounting and the return of funds. It often prompts a swift settlement to avoid court." My plan was simple, dignified, and legal. With Sarah's help, we drafted a formal, bullet-pointed timeline of the money, the policy payout date, every statement Robert provided, the inflated wedding costs. Patricia crafted a letter that was a masterpiece of unassailable calm. It stated the facts, cited the legal obligations, and demanded a full financial accounting and the repatriation of the remaining funds within 30 days. There was no anger in it, no accusation, just the immutable weight of law and numbers. I also documented everything. Texts from Robert about the money, emails about the wedding costs, my mother's voicemails pressuring me. I saved the original wedding quotes I'd initially approved. I built a case, not of emotion, but of fact. I told David everything. His rage was volcanic, but I placed a hand on his arm. "No," I said, my voice steady. "We do this quietly. We do this right." The louder he was, the quieter we must be. We waited for the right moment to send the letter. We wanted no drama, no audience. Just a registered envelope arriving at his office, a fact landing on his desk with a soft, final thud. The letter went on a Tuesday. The response came that Friday, a frantic call from my mother. "Maya, what is this? Robert is beside himself. He says you're accusing him of stealing. How could you?" I kept my voice even. "Mom, I'm not accusing. I'm asking for an accounting. For my own money, as is my legal right. The lawyer has the policy documents. The numbers are what they are." Robert called me directly next. The paternal warmth was gone, replaced by a bristling, defensive bluster. "This is a betrayal, Maya. After all I've done. This is how you thank me." "This isn't about thanks, Robert," I said, looking out the window of the apartment David and I were struggling to pay for. "This is about the $X lump sum from my father's policy on date. Please have your lawyer send the full transaction history and remaining balance to my attorney by the deadline. And consider the wedding invoice null and void. I did not authorize those expenditures." There was a long silence on the other end. I heard the shift, the realization that the dreamer he thought he controlled had receipts, that she had moved in silence and with law on her side. The bluster deflated, replaced by a cold, pragmatic fury. "You'll regret this," he said. But it sounded hollow, a script for a play that had already closed. He settled. A week before the deadline, a bank transfer arrived in a new account I'd opened, accompanied by a tight, one-page statement from his lawyer. It wasn't the full amount. There were fees and taxes deducted, but it was the majority. It was more than enough. The fight had gone out of him the moment he realized I wouldn't fight in the emotional arena he'd constructed. I had moved the conflict to a field where his tools, guilt, public perception, familial pressure, were useless. The true climax wasn't a shouting match. It was the quiet ping of a bank notification on my phone. It was the sound of my own future unlocking. There was no dramatic reconciliation. My relationship with my mother was strained for a long time. She couldn't reconcile the man she loved with the facts I presented. It took years of gentle distance and firm boundaries before we found a new, more honest footing. She never left him, but she stopped pressuring me. Our conversations became quieter, more about her garden and my work than about family finances. With the money, David and I made a modest down payment on a small house. Not the dream home we'd once pictured with Robert's phantom help, but a real one, with a mortgage in our names only. Every brick felt earned. The ghost of my real father, I felt, could finally rest. I saw Robert once, years later, at a cousin's funeral. We nodded across the room. There was nothing left to say. The power balance had permanently shifted. He had tried to use money to buy control and social capital, and in the end, he lost both. The moral wasn't about getting revenge or even getting all the money back. It was about reclaiming your narrative. It was about understanding that the quietest people can make the most resonant sound when they finally decide to speak, not with a shout, but with a fact. Sometimes, the most dignified response to a public humiliation is a private, unimpeachable action. The cruelest plans often fail because they underestimate the quiet strength of a heart that has finally learned to keep its own accounts. If this real-life story of family, betrayal, and quiet strength resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. For more calm reflections on navigating life's complex relationships, consider subscribing to Her Hidden Heart. Thank you for listening.